If you've spent more than 5 minutes on any corner of the internet that even remotely touches on camping, hiking, or the art of not dying when the world ends, you've heard the gospel. It's chanted in forums, whispered in YouTube comments, and sold on laminated cards for your bug-out bag. I'm talking about the Holy Scripture of survival, the rule of threes. You know it by heart. You can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in an extreme environment, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. It's simple, it's symmetrical, and it's dangerously, almost comically, wrong. This isn't just a harmless little mnemonic. Believing in the rule of threes is like using a children's placemat map to navigate the Amazon. It gives you a sense of confidence that reality is very eager to correct, usually in the most permanent way possible. It's a checklist that completely ignores the one variable that matters more than anything: panic. And it wildly miscalculates the timelines on the things it does mention. Today, we're not just going to debunk this rule, we're going to dissect it and see what really gets you when you're stranded in the middle of nowhere. Because the real killers are faster, messier, and don't care about your neat little list. So the rule says you have 3 hours without shelter in an extreme environment. Let's test that theory, shall we? Picture this. You're on a lovely boat trip. Maybe it's a ferry, maybe it's a fishing charter, maybe you're just trying to recreate the Titanic on a budget. Suddenly, you're in the water. It's cold. Not just, oh, better get out of the pool cold. It's North Atlantic, 40-degree Fahrenheit. That's about 4 degrees for the rest of the world, cold. Your handy rule of threes card mentally pops up. 3 hours without shelter. Great. You've got 180 minutes to figure things out. Except you don't. You have about 60 seconds before you drown yourself. This isn't an exaggeration. This is the cold shock response. It's your body's first, frantic, and utterly counterproductive reaction to being plunged into icy water. The second that frigid water hits your skin, your brain's little emergency broadcast system goes haywire. First, you take a massive involuntary gasp for air. If your head is underwater when this happens, congratulations. You've just failed step one of survival by inhaling a lungful of water. Even if your head is above water, you immediately begin to hyperventilate. We're talking rapid, uncontrollable breathing, 4 or 5 times faster than normal. Your heart rate skyrockets, your blood pressure goes through the roof. For anyone with a pre-existing heart condition, the ordeal can end right there with a massive cardiac arrest. This all happens in the first minute. You haven't even had time to process what happened, and your body is already trying its absolute best to kill you. The actual science-based rule for cold water immersion is the 1-10-1 principle. 1 minute to get your breathing under control. 10 minutes of meaningful, functional movement before the cold renders your muscles useless. And 1 hour before you lose consciousness from hypothermia itself. In the case of the actual Titanic in 1912, the water was a balmy 28 degrees. Most of the 1,500 people who went into the water weren't leisurely waiting for rescue boats. They were dead from cold shock and rapid hypothermia within 15 to 30 minutes. So your sacred rule of threes gave you 180 minutes of theoretical survival time. Reality and the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics gave you 1 minute to not drown, 10 minutes to grab onto a piece of floating debris, and maybe an hour if you were incredibly lucky. The rule isn't just wrong, it's a distraction. It makes you worry about building a shelter hours from now when you should be worried about surviving the next 60 seconds. All right, so the rule of threes failed us in the cold, but surely it's 3 hours without shelter clause holds up in the heat, right? After all, freezing to death feels immediate and violent, while heat feels slow, deceptive, like something you can just tough out with a little grit and a stiff upper lip. And that's exactly why it's so much more insidious. Let's swap our icy ocean for a scenic desert hike. It's a beautiful, dry, 110-degree Fahrenheit day. That's 43 degrees Fahrenheit. You've got your water, maybe a little map. You feel fine. A bit tired, maybe, but that's normal. Then you start getting a headache. You feel nauseous. You're dizzy. This is heat exhaustion. Your body is screaming at you, flashing every warning light on the dashboard. It's desperately trying to cool itself down, pouring out sweat to get that sweet evaporative cooling effect. But then the sweating stops. Your skin feels hot and dry. You're confused, disoriented. This is the moment of catastrophe. This is heat stroke. Your body's cooling system has officially failed. Your core temperature, which is normally regulated with obsessive precision, begins to rise uncontrollably. Once it climbs past 104 degrees, 40 degrees, your cellular structure starts to break down. The proteins in your body begin to denature, and the most sensitive, complex collection of proteins you have is your brain. In the simplest terms, your brain begins to cook. Every year, rescue teams in places like the Grand Canyon find hikers who grossly underestimated this timeline. In 2018, a 26-year-old woman named Maddie Popgalea died from heat exposure while hiking the famously strenuous Bright Angel Trail. She was young, she was fit, and according to reports, she was out of water. From the onset of severe symptoms, confusion, loss of motor control, unconsciousness, the window to save yourself isn't hours. It's minutes. By the time you realize you are in serious trouble, the very organ you need to formulate a plan is being actively damaged by the heat. So where's our 3-hour rule now? It's useless. It gave you a timeline for building a shelter when the shelter you really needed was finding a sliver of shade 10 minutes ago and staying put. The heat doesn't care how tough you are. It doesn't care about your schedule. It's a physics problem. And once your internal temperature hits that critical point, you've lost the battle. The rule fails because it measures the wrong thing. It's not about time without a roof. It's about time until your internal thermostat breaks for good. We've talked about cold and heat, the obvious environmental threats. But now we have to talk about the one thing that kills more people in survival situations than exposure, dehydration, and starvation combined. It's the number one all-time undefeated champion of turning a bad situation into a fatal one. It's not a bear or a snake or a zombie, it's panic. There's a fantastic term in psychology called an amygdala hijack. Your brain is a beautiful, complex machine. The prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead, is the calm, rational CEO. It handles logic, planning, and complex problem solving. But deep inside, you have the amygdala. This is your ancient, primitive security guard. Its only job is to detect threats and scream, danger. When it does, it floods your system with adrenaline and cortisol, and it can completely sideline the rational CEO. Think of it like the security guard locking the CEO in a closet, grabbing the controls for the entire building, and just mashing all the buttons at once. This is what happens when you get truly, profoundly lost. Rational thought evaporates. You get tunnel vision. Your heart pounds, you make catastrophic mistakes. You walk in circles, you ditch your gear because it feels too heavy. You ignore obvious signs of a trail or a water source. Your brain is no longer a tool for survival. It has become the primary threat. The tragic story of Jerry Largay on the Appalachian Trail is a heartbreaking case study in this. In 2013, the 66-year-old hiker stepped off the trail to go to the bathroom and got lost. Her own journal, found with her remains over 2 years later, tells the story. She was, at most, 2 or 3 miles from the trail. For nearly a month, she waited for rescue in her tent. She had some food and water. She tried to text her husband for help, but the messages never went through. The devastating part? She was in a dense forest. But all she likely had to do was walk downhill until she hit a stream and then follow it to civilization. This is a fundamental rule of loss proofing. But she didn't. She stayed put. She was so terrified of getting more lost that she became paralyzed. Her amygdala had taken over. The rule of threes gives you zero guidance on this. It's a resource management spreadsheet that ignores the fact that the manager is having a complete meltdown. You can have 3 weeks of food in your pack, but if you panic and drop that pack on day 1, the rule is meaningless. The first thing you need to secure in a survival situation isn't shelter or water. It's your own mind. Because in the wilderness, the most dangerous predator isn't something out there in the dark. It's the one inside your own skull. So your 3-hour shelter rule has been torched, and your brain is a certified liability. But the water rule, that one's got to be solid, right? 3 days without H2O, it's practically a law of physics. You see a countdown clock for it in every movie where someone is stranded in the desert. But here's the unsettling question the rule never asks. What if the very thing you think will save you is actually a shortcut to a much faster, more gruesome ending? The 3 days number is a lazy average for a reason. Dehydration isn't a switch that flips on at the 72-hour mark. It's a slow, grinding process that starts much earlier. Long before you die, you become functionally useless. On day 2, you're already dealing with severe fatigue, impaired judgment, dizziness, and a splitting headache. Your ability to solve problems, to find a trail, and to build that shelter the other rule was so obsessed with is plummeting. The 3-day mark isn't when you get into trouble. It's the deadline by which the trouble has already won. But here's the real kicker. You're on day 2. You're desperately thirsty. Your head is pounding. And then you see it, a beautiful, clear-looking stream, a gift from the heavens. You remember your rule. You've got another day left, but why wait? You plunge your face in and take a long, deep drink. And in doing so, you may have just swapped your 24-hour dehydration clock for a 12-hour biological nightmare. That pristine-looking water is a microscopic soup of horrors. It's teeming with bacteria like E. coli, protozoa like Giardia, and Cryptosporidium. Drinking from that stream is like playing Russian roulette with your digestive system. If you get unlucky, you've just ingested a pathogen that is about to turn your body against itself. Within hours, you'll be in the grips of a violent gastrointestinal illness. We're talking vomiting and diarrhea so severe that you are losing fluids faster than you would by just sitting there thirsty. Think about the pioneers on the Oregon Trail. Their journals are filled with terrifying accounts of cholera. They would drink from a river, and by nightfall, be in the throes of an illness that could kill an adult in under a day through catastrophic fluid loss. They weren't dying of simple thirst. They were dying because their only water source was contaminated. You, in your infinite wisdom, thought you were resetting your survival clock. Instead, you just triggered a self-destruct sequence. The rule of threes made you focus on the presence of water, totally ignoring the far more important factor, its purity. It starts with a single clumsy step. You're on a hike, maybe not even a particularly ambitious one. The trail is familiar. You're thinking about what to have for dinner, and then your boot catches a hidden root. There's a moment of weightlessness, a flash of surprise, and then a sharp, sickening crack as your ankle rolls in a way it was never designed to. You've just introduced a variable that the rule of threes has absolutely no column for, a serious injury. And this one variable doesn't just add a new problem, it takes the entire rulebook, douses it in gasoline, and sets it on fire. The rule of threes operates on the bizarre assumption that you are a perfectly healthy, able-bodied person who has simply been teleported into the wilderness to patiently wait out a set of timers. But the vast majority of real-world survival situations are triggered by, or at least involve, an injury. And that injury becomes the center of the universe. Your broken ankle means you aren't walking to find shelter. You aren't moving to find water. You are now stuck right here until someone finds you or you find a way to move. Suddenly, that 3-hour clock for shelter in an extreme environment looks terrifyingly fast because you can't do a thing about it. That 3-day water clock is just as daunting because the nearest stream might as well be on the moon. The pain and the physiological shock from the injury itself start to drain your mental and physical resources. Your judgment becomes clouded. Your resolve starts to crack. And if you have an open wound, say from a fall, a clock the rule doesn't even know exists has started ticking, the one for infection. Now you're not just fighting the elements, you're fighting a war inside your own bloodstream. An injury acts as a catastrophic force multiplier. It makes every other problem exponentially worse. It makes you vulnerable to hypothermia because you can't move to stay warm. It accelerates panic because you feel helpless. It drains your energy, making you too weak to shout for help. The rule of threes is a plan for a game of chess where all your pieces are on the board. An injury is like having your opponent flip the table over halfway through the first move. It's the asterisk at the bottom of the page that says, all of the above is completely irrelevant if something actually, happens to you. Of all the numbers in this infamous rule, 3 weeks without food is by far the most dangerously comforting. 3 weeks. It sounds like an eternity. It makes food feel like a background problem, a low-priority task you can get to after you've sorted everything else out. It implies you have this huge buffer to figure out hunting, trapping, or the subtle art of not eating poisonous berries. The problem is the rule confuses the technical ability to not be dead with the practical goal, but bone, with the practical ability to actually survive. Sure, your body is a marvel of energy storage. It can keep your heart beating and your brain functioning on some level by cannibalizing its own fat and muscle for about 3 weeks, give or take. But a survivor isn't just a living body. A survivor has to be an active, thinking, problem-solving agent in their own rescue. And that person disappears long before the 3-week mark. Within the first 24 to 48 hours, your body burns through its readily available glycogen stores. After that, it gets desperate. It starts breaking down muscle to create glucose for your brain, and it ramps up the production of ketones from fat. This isn't a smooth transition. This is your body hitting the emergency power switch. The physical result is immediate weakness and lethargy. The mental result is even worse. Your brain, running on this backup fuel, becomes a different machine. You're plagued by apathy, or brain fog, irritability, and an inability to concentrate. For a perfect real-world example, just watch any season of the survival show. Alone. These are legitimate experts, people who know how to build shelters, find food, and endure hardship. And yet, by week 2 or 3, they are often shadows of themselves. They have the skills, but they lack the physical energy and mental horsepower to use them. They lie in their shelters for hours, too exhausted to check their fishing lines, too foggy to plan a hunt. They often tap out not because they are on the verge of death, but because they have become too weak to continue the fight. They are living, breathing proof that functionality is the first casualty of starvation. The 3-week rule is a biological curiosity, not a survival plan. It tells you the maximum possible runtime for your body as a living corpse. It conveniently forgets to mention that after a few days, you'll be too weak to swing an axe, too tired to purify water, and too mentally adrift to make a rational decision. Counting on having 3 weeks is like waiting until your car is completely out of gas before you start looking for a gas station. And so we arrive at the final pillar of the rule of threes, the big one, 3 minutes without air. And you know what? Fine, you got me. This one is, for the most part, physiologically correct. If you are deprived of oxygen, your brain cells begin to die within a few minutes. It's a hard biological fact. Now for the important follow-up question. In what possible scenario is knowing this number actually helpful? The situations where you are actively running a 3-minute clock on your own life are, sure, by their very nature, so catastrophic and instantaneous that a mnemonic device is laughable. Think about it. An avalanche buries you in a ton of snow. Are you sitting there thinking, okay, timer starts now? No. You are in a state of pure primal terror, and your survival depends on factors decided moments before. Whether you were wearing a transceiver, if your partner saw you go under, and if you can avoid inhaling snow. Survival rates plummet after 15 minutes, but the fight is lost or won on based on tools and training, not a memorized number. What about drowning? As we covered, the cold shock response can make you take an involuntary gasp in seconds. The 3-minute rule assumes a calm, controlled environment where you are choosing to hold your breath. An accidental fall into water is the polar opposite of that. The 3 minutes without air rule is the ultimate piece of survival trivia. It's like knowing the exact speed of a charging rhino. It's an interesting factoid about the thing that's about to kill you, but it does absolutely nothing to help you deal with the situation. It is the perfect, final encapsulation of the entire problem with the rule of threes. It's a passive observation, not an active strategy. It treats survival like a spectator sport, where you just watch the timers count down. So there you have it. The rule of threes isn't just a little wrong. It's a dangerously flawed mindset. It gives you a false sense of security and makes you focus on the wrong things at the wrong times. It makes you an accountant of resources when you should be a ruthless manager of risk. The real rule of survival is the rule of one bad decision, one moment of unchecked panic, one overlooked injury, one drink from the wrong stream. That's all it takes to make all the other numbers, rules, and plans completely irrelevant. So there you have it, more proof that the conventional wisdom you've been fed is actively trying to get you killed. If you want to find out what other shenanigans the world is up to, make sure you're subscribed for the next video.